Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jim Durkin. I am the state representative from the 82nd District. I reside in Western Springs, Cook County, and I'm also the minority leader in the Illinois House of Representatives. I am also a former Assistant Illinois Attorney General and a former Assistant Cook County State's Attorney, having worked in the both narcotics unit and also the felony trial division prior to coming into the General Assembly. I'm joined today, as Eleni said, with Illinois State Senator John Curran, also a former Assistant Cook County State's Attorney. We're hoping that Hillside Police Chief Joe Lukasik will be able to join us. Riverside Public Safety Director Matt Buckley, Worth Police Chief Tim Denton, and also he has his Chief of Investigations Nick Boynton joining us as well. We are here to discuss the critical importance about bringing more transparency and accountability to the charging process in our criminal court systems in Cook County to help victims of crime and communities that are desperate for safer streets. It really comes down to a simple formula. A safe society requires cooperation between our police and the prosecuting attorney to make sure cases are being appropriately charged and that laws are being followed. In Cook County, law enforcement, including the Chicago Police Department, the Cook County Sheriff, and local police departments are responsible with investigating. They are responsible for investigating crimes in their jurisdiction. And in the case of most felonies, those investigating agencies, those police departments must seek approval of felony charges through the Cook County State's Attorney Felony Review Division. This symbiotic relationship has existed for decades, and the relationship between law enforcement and the state's attorney must be one of partnership and confidence for the greater public good. But today, it seems as if that relationship has deteriorated, whether by much publicized stories of outright frustration of police with the Cook County State's Attorney Office, Kim Fox, and her office's failure to approve felony charges, or her office's dumping of police investigations into an abyss called continuing investigations. The problem that we see is real and has resulted in hardened criminals and bad actors avoiding responsibility for their crimes, ultimately making our streets less safe. I recently met with a great many of police chiefs from the suburban area of Cook County within the last week who expressed profound frustration with what they have seen play out in the Cook County State's Attorney Office over the past few years. State's Attorney Fox has lost the confidence publicly and privately of police chiefs and the rank and file officers of this county. This has brought a halt to our criminal justice system, and the facts show it. Now, in 2020, the Chicago Tribune reported that State's Attorney Fox dropped approximately 30% of felony defendant charges, a dramatic increase over her predecessor. We also just recently viewed, and we saw firsthand on video, the public feud between the Chicago Police Department and the State's Attorney Felony Review Division with the West Side gang shootout. No charges, 1 dead, 70 shell casings. And also, what we know that carjacking has taken over Chicago and the suburbs and has been approximately a 50% increase in Cook County over the last year and a half. That shows you that crime is increasing. It is getting worse. And we have a state's attorney that is looking the other direction. A state's attorney that believes more in the criminal class than the middle class. Now, in another tragic case where there was a 7-year-old Serenity Boughton who was murdered, police officers proceeded to filing charges against the suspect when the Cook County State's Attorney refused to do so, only to see those charges dropped. Chief Buckley can speak to that. So in light of these problems that are existing not only in the city of Chicago, but also throughout all the suburbs, north, the west side, west suburbs, the south side, because of that, I have filed House Bill 4176 this morning. This bill will demand transparency and accountability within the Cook County criminal justice system. Upon becoming law, this legislation will give local police the right to override the rejection or continuing investigation designation of a forcible felony case where the state's attorney has rejected, where the evidence is clear and convincing. The state's attorney will be allowed to challenge that local law enforcement override in a court if they choose to do so. This legislation will also require the state's attorney to record and to make public each forcible felony where charges have been rejected or designated as continuing investigation. State's Attorney Fox often talks about the high transparency of her office. This legislation can do nothing more than complement those public statements that she has said since she ran as a candidate, but also as the state's attorney of Cook County. This legislation will also hold the Cook County State's Attorney's Office accountable to the often forgotten members in our criminal justice system, the victims of crime and the communities they live in. I'd like to turn it over to our Cook County Suburban Police Chiefs to discuss firsthand their problems that they have witnessed over the past few years and why this legislation is necessary. First, I'd like to introduce Village of Riverside's Director of Public Safety, Police Chief Matt Buckley.
Good morning. My name is Matt Buckley. I'm the Director of Public Safety here in the Village of Riverside. I recently learned of this legislation at a meeting that I attended last week, and it really stuck with me because of how this legislation was pushed forward. When evidence supports a case, and it's clear and convincing evidence, we need to file the charges, and we need those charges and those offenders to be brought into court. And let the judicial system do its work to actually determine whether they're going to be held on bond or charged and released. The reason why I'm speaking of this and why it's so important to us here in Riverside is we recently had a case. The offense did not occur here in Riverside, but it touched our town. This case, it actually took place back on August 15th on a Sunday afternoon, where two young girls were shot while they were being put in the backseat of their car by their mother. They were 6 and 7 years old. The 7-year-old actually succumbed to the injuries of the shooting. In that shooting, there were over 29 shots that were fired, 29 shell casings that were recovered. After the police department worked this case and put the case together, they had clear and convincing evidence to support charges. They arrested the alleged offender here in Riverside, at which time they looked to the state's attorney to approve felony charges on this offender. The state's attorney refused the felony charges and advised them that they needed to CI the case, which is continuing investigation, because the state's attorney did not believe they had clear and convincing evidence. Unfortunately, this department believed they had plenty of clear and convincing evidence, and they were looking to override the charges and actually bring the charges forth to the courts that day. They were told by the state's attorney's office that if they did that, the case would be dropped as soon as they brought it into court. So at the end of the day, this case was CI'd. The offender was brought back to Riverside and released to his residence here in Riverside. He was rearrested on August 13th, last week, and charged with the murder of this 7-year-old girl. He was found here in Riverside at the residence. The reason why I bring this case up and why it's so important to us is because it's my obligation to keep the residents of Riverside and those who visit our community safe. By having a person who is charged with a homicide or accused of a homicide, the courts need to do their job to make sure that this person is no longer a danger to our society. After the bond hearing on Thursday, he was held in the Cook County Jail on no bond. This offender has a violent criminal history. So it's our obligation to make sure that we're doing everything we can that these offenders are held accountable. And that's why I truly believe in this bill. I think it's very important that we get it pushed through, and I'd strongly support it. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Tim Denton from Worth Police Department.
Morning. My name is Tim Denton. I am the Chief of Police with the Village of Worth. I started my career here in the Village of Worth back in April of 2006. And since that time, I've held every single position, starting with patrol. And the reason why I want to bring that up is my department, much like many others, our officers specifically deal with the Assistant State's Attorney's Office on a regular basis. We are not one of those departments that pass everything off to the investigations division and let them take the case from there. So every single one of my officers, including myself, has held some sort of relationship with the ASA's office since, day one starting here. So that being said, back in 2006, 2007, 2008, I can't even tell you how many times I've had to call the state's attorney's office during those time periods. And did I ever have cases that were continued investigations? Absolutely, I did. But maybe those were specific incidents where I was a younger officer and I needed to get that information to make sure that, we had sufficient evidence to bring the offender to court. But since that time, the CIs that we're receiving it doesn't pertain to our cases anymore. And as the chief of police here, I have to do the best I can for the community for which I serve. And just like Chief Buckley had said, for anyone that visits my community as well. And I really feel like we're not doing ourselves justice and not letting the justice system do what it's meant to do. These cases are being cherry picked, in my opinion, to ensure a win in the state's attorney's office and not necessarily serving justice, especially to the victims out there. We are 100% catering to the offenders in these crimes. With that being said, I'd like to introduce you to my senior investigator, Nicholas Boynton.
I'm Investigator Boynton with the Worth Police Department. Been employed since 2013. I know this is more so about the forcible felony aspect, but any felony you call into the state's attorney goes through the same process. Thankfully, our town hasn't been hit by too many forcible felonies, but it's become more and more apparent that the list they'll give you for a continued investigation, and even directly said to me that the information we receive from that CI list may not have an impact on charging or not charging. And that's concerning to me because how many times do I have to arrest the same offender? You want to see a case that I'm working on. I believe I have clear and convincing evidence that this is the offender. In some cases, a full confession with corroborating evidence. And you're telling me no, CI for X, Y, and Z reasons. Those reasons, whether it's sending out a search warrant for more data or things like that, can take weeks. How many times do I have to put that same offender back out onto the street for things that you're directly stating to me may not actually affect my case? I think it needs to be, almost overhauled to show, hey, we have confession, we have corroborating evidence. And icing on the top, it can come at a later time. It shouldn't impact our ability to charge and get him in front of the court at that time.
Yeah, the reason why I wanted to have my investigator present during this is, it's one thing to hear me speak as the chief, but I think it's more important to actually hear from, the guys who actually do this day in, day out. And it's not something that, only happens on an occasion. This is something that's ongoing and definitely needs to be changed. And I fully 100% support Representative Durkin here in these changes that he's trying to make. And I thank you for your time. With that being said, I'd like to pass it on to Senator John Curran.
Thank you, Chief. I'm State Senator John Curran. I represent the 41st Senate District, which includes Western Cook County, as well as Southeast DuPage County and a portion of Will County. As you've heard this morning from our law enforcement officials, it appears, and there's great concern, that the state's attorney's office is applying a heightened standard for charging decisions. House Bill 4176 is a proposal that is an attempt to address the concerns of our law enforcement officials, those officials that are on the front line in providing safety and order in their communities. And they're being let down as they pursue those charges. This will give those officials a process to pursue charges when they believe the state's attorney is applying a heightened standard. At the charging phase, the standard is not, nor should it be, beyond the reasonable doubt. Clear and convincing evidence supporting the criminal charge is the appropriate standard. This proposal gives those law enforcement officials, when they meet that standard, another opportunity for review on that standard. This measure brings accountability to the criminal charging process in Cook County. And further, the public database that will be created due to this measure also brings transparency to the public at large. The public is greatly concerned at the rapid increase in crime, violent crime that's occurring not only in the city, but all throughout the suburbs. This will bring transparency and accountability to that entire process, which the public certainly should and must demand of its officials.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.